For the Are we under control?
Yeah.
I thought probably I would forget to turn it on, so I turned it on before I got here, and it interfered. Good to be with you. Some of you I haven't seen for some time. Glad you were able to make it to Dover this year. Dover has always been an enjoyable event. Coming here and meeting people from various parts of the country, worshiping the Lord together. Tonight I'd like to speak on a church doctrine. Yet I would venture to say probably only about 25% of you ever heard a sermon on it. Now what could that be? One of our church doctrines, but only about 25% of our people ever hear about it. It is a doctrine of which, at least I've very seldom, I've heard it just mentioned maybe one or twice in my ministry from others. But I believe it's important. The title of it is, Should Christians Participate in Carnal Warfare? Our doctrine states, as a result, not a cause, of redemption, believers should regard participation in physical warfare as contrary to a Christian humanitarian calling. I believe that. Although I'm a veteran, I guess no one is better fitted to speak on the subject as one who has been on both sides of the coin. I was taught by my father that as long as you did not take a life that one could serve in the army or in the service, one of the services of our country. So I could not see or understand the stand that the church had concerning carnal warfare. Although it's been a teaching of the church, I think since about 1949. If I should ask you the church, if I should ask you, how would you describe the church as far as carnal warfare is concerned? Now there are two definitions, not concerning our stand, no. Or I should say three. There's a stand in which believer or people feel that one should serve in the service. There's several Sabbath-keeping churches who feel it's all right to serve, but not as a combatant. And that was my stand when I served in the service. I never touched a gun all the time that I was in. Some feel that it's all right to take the training through basic training, train go through all the training of which our country gives to the soldiers. But after that, then drop the gun and become a participant of a non-combatant. So they're referred to as non-combatants. But the Church of God is referred to as a conscientious objector. Conscientious objector. That's what we are. Our doctrine states that we ought not to participate in any way. And that's what got me to thinking. I'm a two-time veteran. I've been employed twice. It was the second time that I took a good look at myself and began to examine the purpose and the reason that I was there. And I could not match it with the Scriptures. So when I was discharged, I sat down and I wrote the draft board a letter and told them under no circumstances would I ever serve again. They wrote me back and they said, Mr. Walker, due to your service and also to your age, you'll probably never be called again. That was not the point. The point was, if it ever come again, they would not think that I was trying to get out of something. My convictions had changed. And young men and young women tonight, my purpose for this sermon tonight is to give you a choice. To allow you to understand, if I can make it plain, so that you'll be able to choose whether it is right to participate in carnal warfare. In my reasoning, when I was in the last time, I served in the medical corps. Medical corps is a mercy unit. But I could see that my participation in the medical corps was just as important to the Army as the man up front with the gun. You take the medical corps out of the Army and you have hindered the success of the Army. I use a comparison when I try to explain the subject. I use the example of someone coming to me and say, Wesley, let's go down and rob the bank. No. I would answer, I don't believe in stealing. That's all right. You don't have to go into the bank. You just drive the car. Now, if we're caught, don't you think the Lord's going to look at me any differently than those who robbed the bank? As I said, so it is with the Army. You take the medical corps out, and you've hindered the Army. In the way I was saying when I served, I don't believe in killing anybody, but I'll patch you up if you get injured so you can go back and kill some more. Now that's somewhat blunt, but I think you'll have to agree that that's true. Each church that I have pastored, I've explained, not only to the church, but of my young people, about the teaching of the church concerning carnal warfare. I believe in trying to let the church understand concerning all of its teachings. But what does the Bible has to say concerning carnal warfare? We need to look at the Scriptures carefully and see what the Lord is trying to tell us. Turn to James, the 4th chapter. James, the 4th chapter. James asks a question here to the church. He says, "Whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lusts that war in your members?" James is asking, what is it that causes wars? It's over personal feelings. It's because someone wants to get his own way. Why did Hitler want to conquer the world? He wanted to be the ruler. Why did Kaiser want to conquer the world? He wanted to be the ruler. Personal feelings. The last time I preached on this, a young man came to me and he says, "Brother Walker, he's talking to the church here. He's not talking about carnal warfare." That's right. He is talking about fighting and wars in the church, but nevertheless, the same thing applies outside of the church. Someone wants to get their own way. You might say, well, what about our personal defense? Well, we'll get to that a little later. But the point is, it's not a righteous cause. God is not the one that's called the church to fight. In the second verse, he says, "You lust and have not. You killed and desire to have, and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you have not, because you ask not." The problem of wars, what is causing them? And I think as you look at it, it's something that we ought not to be a part of. And so James wants the church to sit down and consider, think, is this something you want to participate in? I thought I was innocent because I was not actually doing any physical fighting. But I was a part of an organization which aim and desire was to destroy lives. And the medical corps, again I emphasize, is just as important as the one who's up in front with the gun. It's all one organization. And James is telling us, should not be a part of it. Paul, in his writings in 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, as he writes to the church. 2 Corinthians 10, beginning with the 3rd verse. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We don't use the gun. We don't use that machine that's built to destroy lives. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. And it's something you do not use a gun for. Something else in which Paul is trying to get the church to think through, to avoid as they participate in the things of the world. We have decisions to make. And brethren, it's something that we need to think about beforehand. I've talked to several in the church, and while they were going through basic training and so forth, when it come to Sabbath, it didn't make any difference to them. They participated on things on Sabbath as other days of the week. But all the time that I was in this service, I never participated in anything when it came to the Sabbath. God was good to me, but I believe, brethren, He was good to me because I made a decision. And if we do not make a decision, God is not going to be there. Do it this way. Do it this way. He's telling us what to do. And I tell you, the Sabbath is important to God when you're in the service as well as outside of the army. I remember distinctly when I was first called, was drafted. I was drafted, I did not volunteer or enlisted. I was in California when I was drafted. Got on the train to come back to Fort, what's in my own hometown, Fort. Huh? No, that's not the fort itself. Fort Chaffee, yes. Thank you. On the train, the 2 days that I was traveling on the train, I prayed, God be with me. I arrived in camp on Thursday, and Friday morning I was in the officer's office asking for a pass to go to church the next day. The rules of the army or of the camp that I trained in, you did not leave camp until after 4 weeks of training. But I got my pass. One of the rules, another rule of the camp was no civilian clothing. As I said, I got in camp on Thursday, and Friday morning I was in to ask permission. I hadn't received any army clothes as yet, and I got permission to wear civvies to church. It's conviction. It's a decision that we must make and stand to it or by it. And God will stand by us. Because I'm a living example, that's what He did. How should we treat our enemies? I think Christ gave us a good example in Matthew the 5th chapter. Matthew, the 5th chapter, and the 44th verse. Christ said, "But I say unto you, hate your enemies." Are you with me?
Love your enemies.
Love your enemies. It's sort of contradiction, isn't it? Hold a gun to his head and say, "I love you." Bam. I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. That's the advice, that's the desire that our Lord had when He was here, how to treat one another. Not to destroy man's lives, but to save lives. As we will see later, we'll turn to 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, and see what Peter had to say about our Lord. That goes along with this. 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, and the 23rd verse. Referring to Christ, it says, who, when He was reviled not again. When He suffered, He threatened not. As when He was persecuted, when He nailed to the cross, He didn't say, "You just wait until the judgment day, I'll get even with you." No, He didn't say that. When He suffered, He threatened not, but committed Himself to Him that judges righteously. So Peter, as he wrote about his Master, he wrote and told us how he acted when his life was threatened. We are to follow the example that our Lord left us, gave us. I've been in somewhat of a quandary when someone has enlisted and about to go into the service of the country. They come to me, Brother Walker, I'd like for you to pray for me. How am I going to pray? Lord, allow this guy to kill all he can? All that I was able to do is, Lord, protect him. I couldn't ask the Lord to bless him in what he was going to do. And so that's all that I could ask of the Lord. Protect him, bring him back safely to his family or wife that he leaves behind. That again is decisions that we make sometimes. It's not scriptural. It's not Bible-based. We're to love our enemies, for Christ gave us the example. But then there's a question arises, what about Israel? Israel fought, killed. What about them? Let us turn to Exodus, the 23rd chapter. Exodus, the 23rd chapter. Beginning with the 30th verse. This is God talking to Israel. God says, by little and little, I will drive them out. Notice what He's saying here. I will drive them out. You're not going to have to do it. He's made them a promise of the promised land of Canaan. And He said, you will dwell there. And so God said, I will drive them out. By little and little I will drive them out from before thee, until thou hast increased and inherited the land. And I will set thy bound from the Red Sea even to the sea of the Philistines, from the desert into the river. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land unto your hand. When I spoke on this at one church, one of my elders came to me, which I knew he disagreed on the subject. That was not a surprise. And he said that when Israel came back to the land, they had an army with them and they fought. That's true. But why did they have to fight? It's because they sinned in the beginning. In the beginning, when they first inherited the land, God drove them out. But they failed the Lord, and He drove them into the other nations in bondage. And so when they came back, yes, I agree they had to fight. But it was because of the sin that they committed beforehand. In the 28th verse, it tells us how God was going to drive them out. I will send hornets. Now, you would think that God would use maybe fire from heaven or something like that to destroy them, but He uses something very simple. Very simple. I will send hornets before thee, and will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, the Hittites from before thee. What I'm trying to explain is, brethren, they were going to inherit an earthly inheritance. An earthly inheritance. What kind of inheritance are we going to receive? Turn to 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter. 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter. Paul here, as he talks to Timothy, explains to him about his inheritance. 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter. And the 18th verse. And the Lord delivered me from every evil... read it again. And the Lord shall deliver me from every evil work, and will preserve me unto His heavenly kingdom. Brethren, the kingdom that we're going to receive, we do not have to fight for it. We do not have to take a man's life to inherit it. It's a promise of divine nature. Yes, it's going to be here on earth. It's not going to be in heaven, as some think that they're going to go to heaven sometime. And it amazes me how that a minister can go to college, get the PhD degree, and come home and teach the people that when they die they're going to go to heaven. But yet John 3:13 says, no man has gone to heaven. No, our inheritance is not in heaven, but it's going to be a heavenly inheritance. No more death, no more pain, no more sickness, It's going to be a heavenly kingdom.
Hallelujah.
And so that's why people say sometimes, well, Israel fought. But just remember, not the first time that when they entered the land, they didn't. It's after they sinned and God had to drive them out, and to get back in, yes, they had to fight for it. But our inheritance, we don't. We don't. But then there's the question of the commandments. Turn to Exodus 20. Exodus 20. I don't have a clock back there, so I can preach all night.
Amen.
Excuse me. Exodus, the 20th chapter, and the 13th verse. Thou shalt not kill. I had a young man tell me one time, and he brought up the subject about the army. He says the real the interpretation of this, it said, thou shalt not commit murder. That's possibly true. I've read various renderings of the translation that they use the word murder. And he says murder is premeditation. You plan and you think about it, and so it's murder. It's not just thou shalt not kill. When one goes into the army, is it premeditation? Yes, it is. Let me tell you why. When you go into the army, they teach you how to take that rifle apart. They teach you how to clean it. They take you out on the field with the bayonet on the end of the gun. They teach you how to use the bayonet. And if you hesitate, the sergeant is there by your side. He says, kill him! That's your enemy! Training you, get you in the frame of mind. When the actual battle is going on, who stays up most of the night before, planning the strategies that they're going to use the next day? The generals. It's all premeditated. If you're going to use the right translation of the Bible, thou shalt not commit murder. Yes, it's premeditation. You can't get around it. Most of you are, maybe not most, but I'll still use the phrase. Most of you know Ron Overman. I met Ron when he was in the service in Fort Lewis, Washington. I was a pastor there. His mother was a member of my congregation. That's how I got acquainted with him. Started studying with him. And he became convicted of his sins and accepted the Lord, was baptized. But somehow I neglected to mention or stand about carnal warfare. I still remember tonight. One evening, Ron called me on the phone. He had been training with a bayonet all day. And he says, Brother Walker, he says, I can't take it. It's against my conscience. And I said, well, Ron, that's what we believe. That's what we believe. We believe it's wrong to take a man's life, but the Holy Spirit convicted his heart. But what is he going to do? He's already in the army. I went out to his camp the next day, and we sat down with, I don't know, some officials. Wondered what could be done about Ron, his convictions. And he said, well, he said, you can apply. You can apply. So I went back to my office and I sat down and I wrote a detailed article concerning the stand of the church and the belief of the church. Ron was moved from his unit to the chaplain's office, and he worked in the chaplain's office while this process was going on. And that process had to start from the bottom, his camp, up to Washington, D.C. It took several weeks for that to be done. And he was turned down every step of the way. When the word came back, I knew that Ron was, what's the word? He was honest about it. He was honestly convicted he was wrong. He was sincere. I couldn't think of the word. He was sincere about it. And so I sat down with the Army's lawyer and I said, where did we go wrong? What happened? Because Ron is sincere. And their lawyer looked at my information that I presented from the church, and he said, well, Mr. Walker, he said, if I could extend an opinion, he said, I think you were too short in your explanation. I thought it was quite lengthy. We had one more opportunity to reapply. And I went back to my office. I thought I was writing a book. I spared nothing. And that time, it was approved from the bottom to the top. And Ron was discharged in honor. Murder? Yes, it's premeditated. But again, we have to believe. When I first was drafted, you had to belong to an organization that supported you. But while I was in the first time, President Truman signed a proclamation, just your conscience is your guide. If you feel it was wrong, you didn't have to be part of a church. You didn't have to be a part of an organization that was against carnal warfare. Just your conscience. That made it easier. And so that's about the third step that the argument that they used against it. But they say, well, what if you're invaded by an army? What should you do? Matthew 26. Matthew 26. Beginning with the 51st verse. Behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword unto his place. For all they, now notice now, for all they that take the sword will perish with the sword. They that take the sword will perish with the sword. The same thing is used in Revelation, the 13th chapter. Revelation, the 13th chapter. And the 10th verse. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. Now notice. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Christ is telling us, do not be a part of the carnal warfare. Young men and young women tonight, I hope you're taking this in. I cannot make your decision for you. I'm just explaining why the church believes the way it does. You're the one that's going to have to make a decision. Right now, our army is on a volunteer basis. They're not drafting. But I understood the other day it's getting down to slim pickings. It's getting down to slim pickings. One of these days they could go back to drafting. And young men and young women, when you sign up, make sure how you sign up. If you do not sign up as a conscientious objector, they will not know. And when you get there and say, well, I'm a conscientious objector, boy, you're going to have trouble. I'm not saying you won't win out. But make sure that your convictions show on your papers what you think, what you believe, so they will know. Take a stand and show your convictions. He that taketh up the sword will be destroyed with the sword. My next reference is the clearest of them all. And I don't know how anybody can read this verse and think any otherwise than how the church believes. Turn to Luke, the 3rd chapter. Luke, the 3rd chapter. Because Jesus gives a definite, I don't want to say a command, although it's pretty close to a command. Luke, the 3rd chapter and the 14th verse. Various ones were asking the master what they ought to do. And the soldiers likewise demanded of him, saying, what shall we do? And he said unto them, do violence to no man. A soldier in the army, Christ is telling them, do violence to no man. If we're not to do violence to no man, then why are we in the army? And he says, neither accuse any falsely, and be content with your wages. I guess the soldiers back then was discontented with their wages, the same as we were when I was in. I think we drew $21 a month. Well, remember now, our food was furnished, our clothing was furnished, free rent. It's true that it gets considerable more now, but anyway, it bought our toothpaste and whatever we wanted to buy. I even saved some money. But the point is, do violence to no man. How can you go against that? These were the words of the Master. Do violence to no man. Brethren, these are scriptures that the church rely upon, this decision that they have made. As I said, I'm a veteran myself, and so I'm not one that has been against the army all the while, although I was in the wrong. And when I got out, I asked the Lord to forgive me. It's your decision. My closing text, Matthew the 5th chapter. Matthew the 5th chapter. I believe this is the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew the 5th chapter and the 9th verse. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. That's what we need to be, brethren, is peacemakers, not peace destroyers. So I hope that if you had never heard a sermon on this, you've heard one tonight. I just wanted you to know why the church believes the way it does. It's not promoted in the church as much as I would like for it to be promoted. Back in my younger years, it was promoted more widely. Brother Straub, he was the promoter of it. Most of you may not know him, but some of you might. He was one of the ministers I trained under. He was a promoter of it. He even went to the draft board with some of the draftees to get them from serving in the service. The church supported them 100%. So you have a decision, young men, some young women. I hope you make the right one. God bless.